and offer a place to network. Learn more about the Nassau County Bar Association by calling 516-747-4070 or visit nassaubar.org.
Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. Our guest is David Nassaney, and he's not an attorney, but he's an expert on issues concerning caregivers who in many cases are elderly, and he's helping our listeners to benefit from his experiences. David, you've started to give us some ideas about some of the problems that you can try to avoid and that you may have to save your parents from. So just tell us some...
Or yourself as well from legal jeopardy.
So what happens if your relative gives the power of attorney to a scam artist?
Well, unfortunately, that does happen. And what the first thing you should do is the obvious thing: call an attorney and call the police. Number one, you want to try to track down the scam artists. If they're sharp, they won't leave a trail, so it's almost impossible to find them once they have your Social Security number or a power of attorney or whatever like that. They already have the tools to maybe open another identity. But obviously you would put a fraud alert on your credit, and so there are ways to stop that and protect that. But you got to do it quickly, because the longer you wait, the worse the problems will be. What I was mentioning before is that seniors may even accuse their loved one of abuse or theft. Now you might say, well, my loved one would never do that or call the authorities on me. Well, don't be too sure of that. Especially, an Alzheimer's patient who often becomes delusional and paranoid about people, especially family members, stealing their stuff. So now that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't become their caregiver. But just make sure you get an official diagnosis from a physician of the Alzheimer's or dementia first, and then fill out all the proper legal papers, the power of attorney, so there's no confusion about what's going on. You want to do this before the condition gets really bad. You want to fill out a living will, which is something that basically says, under what circumstances do you want the plug pulled if a machine is keeping you alive? Yes, I want the paddles, or no, I don't want the paddles. I don't want to be resuscitated. I don't want tubes down my throat. I don't want feeding tubes. I don't want a ventilator. I don't want you to cut a hole in my throat, for a trach. I know where I'm going when I die, and I don't want you to prolong it. If I'm suffering, just pull the plug. And that's a very important document. It's very important that you get that filled out while they're in relatively good health. So, other issues, labor laws don't currently protect children and teens from the same abuses that adult workers enjoy when their parents force them to care for grandma. So here you have a situation. You have maybe a single mom, and her mother lives with her, a sickly mother, and she has to work, to pay the bills, and there's no one else to watch grandma, so she leaves her 8-year-old home all alone. Maybe they're going to school, maybe they're not. 1.6 million children and teens from ages 8 to 18 are often left alone caring for an elderly grandparent while the parents are at work. And these kids, like I said, are subject to the same stresses that adults are exposed to, and often without the breaks or the proper lunch periods, yet no labor laws apply to their protection. And that's pretty scary, don't you think?
Absolutely. And you also mentioned someone being a victim of, let's say, identity theft or some con artists, taking their money. You can try to put different holds with credit bureaus, perhaps in advance, under the appropriate circumstances, or let banks know to notify you or the authorities if for some reason they are trying to make a large withdrawal.
Absolutely, that's a great point, because chances are, your parents, your elderly parents, aren't in the habit of withdrawing large amounts of money from the bank, so they need to know, hey, I have elderly parents, I think they have dementia, so if you see any red flags, and of course they're trained to do that anyway, But the power of attorneys and all the other legal paperwork, which I'm not an attorney, so I don't know which ones to fill out, but talk to your attorney, and they will definitely get you in touch with that. And the credit bureaus, you bring up a good point there. Put a credit hold on their accounts, because they're not going to be applying for credit cards, so it's no big deal. And if they do want to apply for something, in the unlikely event, you can just temporarily remove it, or you explain to the credit agency why you put it on, and so on. And yeah, that's attempting to stop problems before they occur.
And sometimes if you're fighting the issue of control, the court may have to hold some type of guardianship proceeding to decide whether that person is competent to handle their property and or their other affairs. So that's something you would have to to consult a lawyer about, and they might rely on lay people as witnesses or experts to talk about their competency.
Yeah, well, you definitely want to try to get that power of attorney. Usually if an attorney or a judge thinks that there is some issue or some question, then they would recommend a guardianship, or, I'm looking for the word, when you go into probate, what's that word?
Sort of a trustee or someone.
Yeah, so they'll recommend that. It just depends on, every situation is different. There's adult children. Go ahead.
No, probate might take place after the person has passed on. You want something that would put someone in charge of their affairs or the health care or the property while they are still alive, even if they are disabled.
Yeah, that's important to do before you start putting the home in your name or the checking account, on your account, because, like it says, the red flags, especially if you're trying to qualify them for Medicaid, because Medicaid is a great thing, especially if you have Medicare and Medicaid. They call it the golden ticket, because facilities are very, very expensive. $35,000 and up. And so a lot of these people have no other option but to go on Medicaid. Now, Medicaid traditionally has not paid for assisted living, but they do have 2 pilot programs that were 5 years each. It's in its second year now. It's called the Assisted Living Waiver Program, and Medicaid will actually pay the entire cost. They'll take your Social Security check, of course, and then they will pay the difference of the cost. They did that with my mother. $3,500 a month in a facility. They took her $1,100 Medicare or Social Security check, and then they paid the difference. We didn't have to pay anything. But first, they had to check to make sure she didn't go over the limit. So the house was already in my sister's name, because my mother couldn't handle her finances anymore. So she took all her money, she put it in her account, and she put the house in her name, because it was proven. We had a doctor report saying that my mother was not able to, and so my sister was now in charge of the finances. And so that would, if anybody comes knocking on the door and says, hey, what are you doing here? Because it's similar to the bankruptcy laws, where they have a look-back period to see if you're only declaring bankruptcy because you're trying to milk the system. And it's the same thing with Medicaid.
And again, it's good to do these things as a precaution. And what about preventing conflicts between siblings as to who should control the assets or make decisions regarding the relative?
That's a big one. I actually know a friend who this happened to. Her elder brother, was stealing money from her elderly mother, and she was very, very wealthy because her husband worked at Carnation. He was a high executive, and he later died, and now the mother was in charge of the estate. But as she started getting older, the older brother immediately came in there, and he started handling her affairs. Didn't ask anybody, just took over. And all of a sudden, it's not only the scam artists who are prey on the elderly, but it could be their very own child. And if this child has a power of attorney, it will be very difficult, but not impossible, to fix this. Of course, you'll need proof, and that can be very difficult since you don't have access to any of your parents' papers or assets anymore, and the person with the power of attorney does. The only option is to call, the elder line, abuse line, but it didn't work for my friends because the mother, who was a little, fuzzy in her head to begin with, was afraid, and so she would lie for her son. And when they came to her door saying, "Are you being abused?" She goes, "No, everything's fine."
Again, you could always bring like a competency proceeding, but it might be an expensive and involved process. We only have a moment or two left.
All right.
What information is available at your website, and do you have any final tips you want to give our listeners?
Well, my website, first of all, is caregiverdave.com, or you can just Google the two names, Caregiver and Dave, you'll find me. And my website is just full of resources for caregivers mostly. And, of course, most caregivers are caring for elderly. So you'll find lots of resources over there. And I also have a radio show, The Caregiver's Caregiver, Dave, The Caregiver's Caregiver, and that's also the 200 episodes that I've done so far are on the website as well. So tune in and listen to our radio show, and you will get a lot of great practical advice, and hopefully we can keep you out of the hospital, keep you out of the morgue, and keep you out of jail.
And you want to spend a lot of money from being stolen by someone or being used in a big, expensive legal battle if you haven't taken these steps.
Oh, come on. Caregiving is hard enough and stressful enough, and, most people already feel like they're in caregiver prison, and they don't know, how they're going to make it to the next day. The last thing they need is a legal battle on their hands. So. And
just in a few seconds, is it good to have this person, while they retain control, to put your name or your sibling's name on a checking account so you can pay their bills in case they're not able to do it?
There's a plus and minus on that. On my mother-in-law, she put her son, my brother-in-law, on the checking account, and she's always... See, when they both have access to it, that means she can write checks too, and she's always writing checks without telling him and causing the account to go overdrawn. Okay. I think it's much better to just take away her authority, and that can be kind of touchy because, there's the control issue. Yeah, Dave,
I'm sorry, but we've run out of time, and I think our listeners have a good idea. And as you heard, you can check caregiverdave.com.
CaregiverDave.com.
Okay. Thanks for being our guest today, and please join us next week for another program on Law You Should Know here on 90.3, the voice of Nassau Community College, and also over the internet at nccradio.org.